Welcome to the Putting the Public into Health podcast by Dr. Richard Pan. As we face one of the greatest public health disasters in a century, this podcast will address questions and issues from you, the public, about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on people's health and lives. I am Dr. Richard Pan. I am a physician with a background in public health, and I'm proud to represent the people of Sacramento, Elk Grove, West Sacramento, and parts of Sacramento County in the California State Senate. I want to share with you important information and stories to help each other during this difficult time. Among the biggest challenges of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic is ensuring our children are getting educated while schools are closed to slow the spread of the virus. I am grateful to have Sarah Kirby-Gonzalez, a National Board Certified Teacher and a Folsom Cordova Unified Teacher of the Year, join me today. She has been teaching for over a decade and a half and holds a master's in curriculum and instruction. Thank you, Sarah, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So first, tell me, why did you decide to become a teacher, and what do you currently teach?
Okay. When I started in college, I was going through my general education courses and working at a preschool, and I started to take child development classes, and I fell in love with the research and getting to apply that with the preschoolers that I was working with, and that helped form the classes that I then took, and I went right into the teaching program from there. And I currently teach 5th grade. I've taught kindergarten through 6th.
Wow. And what kind of topics have you been covering in 5th grade?
In 5th grade, we do in social studies, we start with the founding, really, of America, from the early colonization through the Revolution. We talk a lot about government, so the students know who their senators are, and they understand a little bit about civic engagement and how to be involved in the political process as well. In science, we've changed over now, of course, to the next generation science standards. Students are starting to work on engineering. They're working on understanding how our world works in ecosystems, and gives you a little taste. In math, we're all about fractions and geometry and measurement. So we do it all in 5th grade.
Wow, and these are such important topics. So now what happened is COVID shows up. We're having to close the schools. So as a teacher, how have you adapted to the closure of your school?
Yeah. Well, teachers, what we do best is adapt sort of on a dime, but this really changed everything about how we view education with our kids. So if I was in class right now, I believe strongly in limiting some of the use of technology in a classroom. We certainly use computers for research and as a tool, but I've been a vocal critic of, say, putting our kindergartners on a computer during the day when they could be learning in other ways with their teachers. And now we certainly are relying so heavily on that technology. In the classroom, we would be doing book discussions and having dialogue and group projects. We'd be doing a project right now about spies of the revolution and going through stations. And so many of those things are very hard to do through a computer screen with my students. But we are certainly doing our best, and with a limited amount of planning and brand new platforms to reach students. But my focus right now with kids is a little different than it would be in the classroom. Right now it's really about how are you doing, what's happening in your world, because the first thing to do when kids come to school, teachers stand at the door and they greet them, not just to say hello, but to really look in their eyes and see, how are you doing today? Did you get enough sleep? Did you get in an argument at home? Do you need something to eat? And we're not able to start our days in that way with our students. And so trying to find opportunities to make sure that they're doing okay and they're getting the help that they need has been made more challenging as we go.
Yeah. So as you mentioned that you can't quite look your students in the eye in person, so how are your students doing now? What kind of information are you getting about how your students are doing?
Sure. Well, we are doing some virtual meetings, just like teachers all over our country right now. And it's been interesting because some of the students love that. They thrive on it. My own 3rd grader loves that time with her class. But other students don't. and they don't always join those meetings. It's not the best platform for them. My own kindergartner was putting herself on mute so nobody could see her, and the meeting was giving her some anxiety. And so what works for one certainly doesn't work for all, which is true in the classroom, but also in these ways. So we have messaging through the platform we're using in digital learning to reach out to students and say, how are you doing through a message? We, of course, have our virtual meetings, and I've adapted them a little bit now to, instead of do a whole class meeting, to meet in small group or one-on-one based on the student's needs.
Wow.
And they're doing, I guess it's a mixed bag of how they're doing. I wouldn't have been able to predict to you who is engaged in there every day and who is not. It's been surprising for me to see some of the students that I'm really having to reach out to where in the classroom they were always the first one with their hand up and right there. And I think that's because our classrooms are such a neutral environment. You know, students, if you had a hard day or what's happening at home, you can leave that at the door and come in to the room. But in this case, we're coming into their homes, and they all have such different experiences going on right now at home that it is kind of a mixed bag of how they're doing. And the overwhelming response is that they want to be at school, and they want to be with their classmates. From my students and from my colleague students as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, normally in the classroom, you may have some access to other supports for students or other staff at the school. Are you able to access any of that now, or are you a little bit on your own in terms of, I see a student who's struggling or having challenges doing my meetings and so forth with them remotely?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at our schools, we, of course, have our nurses, we have our paraeducators, we have our speech therapists, and everyone is rolling up their sleeves and working really hard to serve students. And everyone has our kids at the forefront of everything that they're doing. But it certainly is more challenging because I could go down at recess and go talk to a colleague and say, hey, I'm worried about so-and-so. Can you just check in on them real quick? Mm-hmm. And that would be a pretty seamless process at a school. And in this way, it is harder to get services. And, for example, if you have students who are experiencing homelessness and having to reach out to the homeless coordinator and do a lot more following up. So the things that we're spending our time on right now are much more technology-based, issues with technology, and working to kind of streamline communication that is typically not so challenging at school. And in terms of our students' needs, that is one of the biggest challenges is our students who have IEP goals and who do need and deserve to have that individualized plan met and have their needs met in a different way than their peers. And that is a challenge to do right now in this environment. So everyone is doing their best. But certainly in the fall, if we're keeping this distance learning, we will be better. We're learning a lot right now of what's working and where we can all do better with not a lot of planning at all, in our schools.
Now, you touched on many of the challenges of distance learning. What do you view as the biggest challenges in distance learning, and how has the school district prepared you as a teacher to do distance learning?
Sure. Well, where I teach, we're using a brand new platform that we haven't used before. And I greatly appreciate the work that the district has been doing for technology support. But learning a brand new platform is challenging. And interacting with the students on that is challenging, and telling them how to get to this link or go there. And as I told you, I would not be relying on at this level of links in technology as I am certainly right now in what I'm doing. We would have gone to outdoor education just last week. We would have been at outdoor ed. And for our students, that's, for many of them, the first time that they're away from home. They're exploring new things. They're practicing challenging themselves on a ropes course. And they're getting all these experiences that we cannot provide in this format. Mm-hmm. But our kids are also getting a lot of skills also during this time of resiliency, of needing to do some of their scheduling. I talked to them a lot about that. How are you going to manage your time today? How are you going to decide what activity to do first? Because they do have a lot of flexibility in that. So they are also showing their resiliency, their flexibility, and their hard work in this new environment.
Now, prior to COVID, we often talked about the summer slide and how that impacted students, particularly some students would basically, how far back students would sort of slide back when they were out of school for probably 2 months or so of summer or, 6 weeks. But now we have students who are away for an extended time. We are doing distance learning. What do you see as we're heading toward? I mean, we're wrapping up one school year with stay-at-home. We're heading toward a new school year. We're not exactly sure when that will start, hopefully in the fall. But what are some of the things that you're concerned about as a teacher about this sort of extended time away from school, or this time, significant portion of the time doing distance learning versus being able to be in the classroom?
Sure. Well, I think it is important to note, and I think it helps reduce some anxiety with our students and families, that our kids were in school for about 75% of the school year. Mm-hmm. And that was the bulk of really the academics that we do, the rigorous academics, was in that 75%. And so, for example, for fifth grade, this 25% that we have left, 3 weeks of those would have been taken up with some state testing. There's a science test, a language arts test, and a math test. And as you probably noticed, the first thing that when our schools closed that people were asking for was connections and being with their teachers and academics, not for the state testing. Mm-hmm. And so that was certainly something that we were all very glad was sort of taken off of our shoulders to worry about, but it is important to note that. So that was about 3 weeks that students were not actively learning in the same way that they were those 75% of the time we were at school. And then the last week of school, my students would be practicing for promotion practice, doing buddy activities, all very meaningful performances, music performances, all very meaningful stuff, but not the heavy academics. So we're certainly missing out on some in-person classroom learning, but teachers do what they do best, which is when they come back with students, they assess where they are, where the holes are, and how they're going to help get them back up to speed. And as we really focus in on the most essential goals of learning, so I think of my own kindergartner, it is her sight words, it is her counting to 100. Those are the academic things that I can really work on at home, her one-to-one correspondence in math, and sort of take out writing, of course, and take out some of the others. And so if we hone in on the most important goals to learn, I'm not as concerned academically as if this had happened earlier in the year. Mm-hmm. But certainly the relationships and some of the things that kids need to work on with their buddy classes and gaining independence to talk in front of their peers, that is the part that we're going to really want to build back, is that confidence of being a student, working in your groups and talking in front of the class.
Now, you're both a teacher and a parent of school-age children, as you mentioned. So what kind of advice would you give parents to help their children keep up with school?
Yeah, I think as a parent, the most important thing that we can do right now for our kids is to really just love on them. And I notice that when we have outbursts sometimes at home, which we do because this is hard, that it's important to just put the work down and say, let's play a board game. Let's go outside for a walk. And I understand that not all parents have that privilege right now. We have working parents that are outside of the home. My own husband is working outside the house right now. Parents are under a lot of stress if they've been laid off. And so I know that this is a hard time for everybody. But focusing with our children on the relationships with them and how we can help them to feel secure right now during this time of change, I think is the most important thing that parents can do. And many of our educators, like myself, are teaching our own children or working with our own kids. And there have been days where I'm working with my students and my own children are running around in the background with their hair not brushed and pajamas. And so we need to all just give each other some, that it's a little overused, but grace and for ourselves and for our children. And as I alluded to, we don't know what's happening at home with our families. I have a student whose mom is a nurse, and she's staying in a hotel. She hasn't been home this whole time. They're missing her. We have other families, of course, who are experiencing homelessness, and there's a lot of challenges our families are facing. And so focusing on the well-being of the family unit needs to come first and foremost. And the teachers will get there with the kids. We'll get them up to speed.
No, that's great advice. And I know that sometimes parents are particularly focused on the academic side of things, and certainly that's very important, but also recognize that the socio-emotional side of things need equal, if not even greater attention during this difficult time.
Yes, thank you.
So, we talked a bit about getting ready for next year. You had to learn a new platform and work with the students and families to figure things out. What kind of things are you doing and your colleagues and teaching doing to prepare for the next school year? What do you see that you might be doing over the summer as well for students who may be struggling, who normally would have gone to summer school? What kind of things are, it's kind of like you're building the plane as you're flying it, right? Because you're trying to do the teaching and so forth. And so we're looking at, maybe there's a little pause over the summer, but I'm not sure it's really much of a pause. So what are some of the things that teachers are doing to prepare for the summer and the following school year?
Sure. Yeah, we're building the plane as it's flying and not knowing what materials will be handed next. And so I think you brought up, and you alluded to this earlier, of course, the summer slide. Summer school is such an important time for our kids, and our districts are all working on how they can help support students this summer as well, those students who really need that extra time. But it will look different. And in terms of next school year, as an educator, we're really right now have sort of all options on the table. And our districts are all working closely with of course, our county health offices, education office, the state guidelines that have just been rolling out. And there's a lot of unknowns. And so I think for us as educators, we are taking a breath right now and having all things on the table. We're hoping to have some decisions in June, at the end of June, of what the year will look like. It will look different, so I want to put some parents at ease that what we have been doing in this distance learning was, a switch on a dime, and we will have more time to ensure that we are meeting some of these needs that we have seen arise and some of the disparities that we have with students. And so whatever it looks like, and districts are looking at multiple models, we are going to work to address and get parent feedback. There are a lot of parent surveys going out. Every single district should be doing that now. Parents, if you're not getting one, can reach out, and students, of course, can reach out to teachers, the principal, and share what the challenges and successes are, because that will help inform us as we move forward. And right now, safety is our number one, making sure our students are safe and our staff is safe. Which normally education is that number one. And, we normally aren't worried about public health like we are right now, but that is our number one priority. And so the academics, just know that people are working really hard, but we don't have the answer today, but we hope to have it soon.
No, I appreciate that. As you mentioned, we all need to have some grace with each other, and recognizing as someone who's involved in public health, that we're still figuring out the public health guidelines. So as school districts and teachers are struggling with, what is we going to do to prepare for next year or the summer, they're asking questions of public health. So what can we do? What should we do to keep students safe? And sometimes the answer is, we're not sure. We have some general ideas, right? We need to socially distance. We don't want to have large crowds, but does that mean we can't? What do we do with the classroom, right? Do we only let half the students in? Do we do half days, et cetera? And so that's still very much up in the air. And I hope that as people are listening to this podcast, recognize that our teachers and school districts are trying to figure this out while they're still seeking advice and guidance from public health authorities to keep people safe, and recognizing that some of that guidance is still being developed as we're learning more about this virus. So school districts don't necessarily have specific guidance yet. We're working very hard on it at the state, and I know the Superintendent of Public Instruction has been working on that as well, working with our public health authorities. But many ways, school districts themselves are still seeking guidance as to what they can do or not do in terms of the teaching environment.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So, again, thank you so very much, Sarah, for sharing your experiences as a teacher. Really appreciate what you had to share. I know that many parents and students are trying to figure out what's going on. So, again, thank you so much for participating in today's podcast.
Thank you. I deeply appreciate it.
Yeah. So thank you for listening to this episode of Putting the Public into Health by Dr. Richard Pan. If you have questions or ideas for a future podcast, please email them to senator.pan@senate.ca.gov. Please stay at home as much as possible, stay at least 6 feet away from others outside, wash your hands frequently, and try not to touch your face. Together we are slowing the spread of the disease and saving lives. Thank you so much for listening.